Before I said a single word, I set the folder on the conference table. Just placed it there, quietly, right in the center, between the water pitcher and the stack of documents my son's attorney had prepared. The room went still. My son, Garrett, was sitting at the far end of the table. He was wearing the navy blazer I had bought him for his college graduation 37 years ago. The same blazer. I noticed that. I don't know why I noticed that, but I did. Beside him sat his attorney, a woman named Patricia Crane, who had the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. And beside her, in the chair closest to the window, was the man I had called my best friend for 41 years, Walter Hines, my business partner, the godfather of my children, the man who gave the toast at my wedding and held my hand at my wife's funeral. Walter was looking at the folder the way a man looks at a car accident. He couldn't stop staring, and he already knew it was going to be bad. "Mr. Calloway," Patricia Crane said smoothly, "we appreciate you joining us. As discussed, today's meeting is simply a formality. The board has reviewed the transition plan, and we're prepared to." "Before we begin," I said, "I'd like everyone to take a look at what's in that folder." Nobody moved. "I'm 63 years old. My name is Gerald Calloway. I spent 40 years building Calloway Precision, a mid-size manufacturing company in Columbus, Ohio, that makes specialty components for the aerospace and medical device industries. I started it in my garage in 1984, with $12,000 I had saved, working double shifts at a machine shop and a loan from my mother-in-law that I paid back with interest inside of 18 months. At its peak, the company employed 214 people. It was my life's work, my identity, the thing I was most proud of, second only to my children. And the two people sitting across that table from me had spent the better part of 14 months trying to take it away. That folder contained the proof. 48 hours earlier, I was sitting in the waiting room of a private investigations firm on the 4th floor of an office building downtown. The firm was run by a woman named Diane Kowalski, 61 years old, former federal investigator, the kind of person who had spent 30 years watching people lie under oath and had developed a very particular expression for it. Flat, patient, unimpressed. She had called me 2 days before and said she had something I needed to see. I had hired her 8 months ago. Not because I suspected anything specific, but because my gut had been sending me signals I couldn't ignore. The kind of low hum that starts somewhere behind your sternum and doesn't go away no matter how many logical explanations you offer yourself. Small things. An email chain where my name had been CC'd, but 2 names had been BCC'd, and I only caught it because of a glitch. A board meeting that had been quietly rescheduled without my knowledge. A moment at my own company's Christmas party where Garrett and Walter were standing in the corner talking with an intensity that stopped when they saw me approaching. I told myself I was being paranoid. I had lost my wife, Eleanor, 14 months before. Breast cancer. 17 months from diagnosis to the day I sat beside her bed and felt her hand go still in mine. Grief does strange things to a person's mind. Makes you see shadows in places where the light is perfectly fine. I thought maybe that's all it was. It wasn't. Diane set a manila envelope on the table between us. Not a digital file. Not a printed report. A physical envelope, the kind you can't click away from. "What I'm about to show you," she said, "is going to be difficult to look at. Take your time." Inside were 3 sets of documents. The first was a series of communications between Walter Hines and a private equity firm based out of Atlanta called Meridian Capital Group. The communications spanned 11 months, starting 3 months before Eleanor died. Walter had been in contact with them about a potential acquisition of Calloway Precision. He had been providing them with internal financial documents, client lists, and proprietary production data. He had been negotiating a sale price. He had been negotiating without me. The second set was worse. It was a series of text messages and emails between Walter and my son, Garrett. My son, who worked as vice president of operations at the company I had given him a position in at 30 years old, who I had been grooming to take over, whose college tuition, 2 cars, and down payment on his house in Westerville had all come from the company I built. The messages made clear that Garrett knew about the Meridian negotiations. Not only did he know, he had provided additional internal information that Walter didn't have access to. He had been Walter's source inside the operations division. And in exchange, Meridian's acquisition offer had included a separate, undisclosed payment to Garrett of $460,000. $460,000 paid to my son to help sell my company behind my back. The third document was the one that made the room feel like it was tilting. It was a letter drafted by Patricia Crane's firm, not yet filed, addressed to the Ohio Probate Court. It cited concerns about my mental fitness to run a business. It referenced my grief, my age, and several incidents that had been quietly documented over the past 6 months. Small mistakes I had made in meetings, a date I had confused on a contract, a supplier call I had missed. Incidents that I now understood had been engineered. Meetings scheduled at times they knew I'd be confused. Deadlines moved without notifying me. A quiet, deliberate pattern designed to create a paper trail of incompetence. If Meridian's acquisition offer was rejected, this letter was the backup plan. Have me declared unfit and force the transition that way. They had been building 2 roads to the same destination, and I had been walking straight toward both of them. I sat in Diane's office for a long time without speaking. The coffee she'd poured me went cold. The city outside her window went about its business, cars and people and all the ordinary noise of an ordinary afternoon that had nothing to do with my world collapsing. "Your son," I finally said. "I'm sorry, Gerald." He knew. From the beginning, Diane was quiet for a moment. Based on the timeline of the communications, he was brought in approximately 4 months after Walter's initial contact with Meridian. Walter appears to have approached him first, but Garrett's involvement escalated quickly. By month 6, he was the more active of the two. Garrett, my son, Eleanor's son, the boy she had rocked through ear infections at 2 in the morning, who she had sat up all night with before the SATs, who had cried at her bedside in those final weeks and told her she was his best friend, using his mother's death as cover to gut the company his parents had built. "And Walter," I said. 41 years. I know. He came to the funeral. He spoke at the service. I know. He told me she was the best woman he'd ever known besides his own mother. Diane didn't say anything. She just let me sit there with it. I asked her one question before I left. "Can this be stopped?" She looked at me with those flat, patient eyes. "That depends entirely on what you do in the next 48 hours. The conference room was very quiet. Nobody had touched the folder. Walter was looking at his hands now. Garrett had glanced at me once and then looked away. Patricia Crane was still wearing the same smile, but it had shifted slightly, the way a building shifts before the foundation gives. "Nobody wants to open it?" I asked. "Mr. Calloway," Patricia said. "I'm not sure what you think you have there, but today's agenda, I said, is whatever I decide it is. Because this is still my company. My name is on the building. My money built those machines. My relationships with the clients you've been quietly sharing with Meridian Capital Group. So we'll get to your agenda in a moment. First, I'd like to discuss 11 months of unauthorized communications with a private equity firm, a payment of $460,000 to my son, and a draft petition to have me declared mentally incompetent." The smile disappeared. Garrett's head came up. Walter exhaled once, hard, like he'd been punched. I had the documents in that folder certified by a forensic accounting firm and reviewed by my attorney, who is, at this moment, filing an emergency injunction to halt any transfer of company assets or shares pending a full investigation. You'll find a copy of that filing in the back of the folder, along with a letter from the Ohio Secretary of State's office regarding the disclosure violations attached to the Meridian negotiations. Patricia Crane opened her mouth. "I'm not finished." I kept my voice level. I had practiced this. Not the words, exactly, but the tone, the steadiness. Eleanor used to say that the most powerful thing a person could do in an argument was refuse to raise their voice. She was right about most things. "Walter, you want to tell me when you first contacted them?" because from what I can see, it was while Eleanor was still alive, while she was in treatment. While I was driving her to chemotherapy 3 times a week and you were sitting in her kitchen drinking her coffee and telling me everything was fine at the office. Walter said nothing. His face had gone the color of old concrete. While my wife was dying, I said. That's when you started. The room stayed quiet for a long time. It was Garrett who finally spoke. His voice was strange, thin, like he was trying to find it. Dad, don't. I need you to understand. I said don't. I looked at my son. My son, who had Eleanor's forehead and her way of tilting his head when he was thinking, who I had taught to ride a bike in the parking lot of our first shop and who had fallen asleep on my shoulder every car trip until he was 9 years old. I have read every single message between you and Walter. I know what you said. I know what you agreed to. I know what you were paid. I don't need you to explain it to me right now. He looked down at the table. What I need, I said, is for everyone in this room to understand that the meeting you thought you were having today is over. The acquisition is over. The petition is over. And if either of you believes you have a legal path forward after what's in that folder, I strongly encourage you to consult counsel that isn't Patricia Crane, because she was not retained to advise you when your plan fell apart. She was retained to execute a plan that is no longer executable. Patricia Crane stood. I think we all need to take a step back. These are serious allegations, and they're not allegations, I said. They're documents. She left 20 minutes later. Not much to say after that. Walter stood by the window after she was gone. Garrett was still in his chair. Neither of them looked at each other. Whatever partnership they had built, it was already dissolving in the particular asset of a plan that had failed. I want to know one thing, Walter. I was still seated. No reason to stand. This wasn't a confrontation anymore. It was just 2 old men in a room at the end of something. One honest answer, after 41 years. He turned from the window. His eyes were red, though he hadn't cried. Not yet. Did Eleanor know? Before she died, did she know what you were planning? Something moved across his face. I watched it carefully. He took a long time answering. No, he said finally. Eleanor didn't know anything. I believed him. I don't know why. Maybe because it was the only thing I needed to believe. Eleanor had gone to her grave thinking her husband's best friend was the man she always thought he was. I decided to keep that. Then get out of my building, I said. And don't come back. I had a meeting scheduled for that evening with my daughter, Melissa. She's 59, lives in Cincinnati, runs a landscape architecture firm with her husband. She had driven up that morning, not knowing the full details, only that I had asked her to be there. She was waiting in my office when I came back from the conference room. She looked at my face and stood up immediately. How bad? She asked. I sat down. My knees had decided, somewhere in the past hour, that they were 63 years old and had been standing on a lot of tension for a long time. Your brother and Walter tried to sell the company without my knowledge. They had a draft petition to have me declared incompetent as a backup. The deal is stopped, the injunction is filed, but it's going to be a process. Melissa sat very still. She had always been the one who went quiet when things were serious. Garrett was the one who talked when he was upset. Melissa went silent and thought before she spoke. Eleanor was the same way. Garrett knew, she said. It wasn't a question. He wasn't just aware of it. He was a participant. He was paid. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet but steady. He was in the room. She nodded slowly. What do you need from me? That's the question that broke me, just slightly, around the edges. Not the betrayal. Not the conference room. Not even the thought of Walter in Eleanor's kitchen while the negotiations were already underway. It was my daughter asking what she could do. I don't know yet, I said honestly. I just needed someone in this building who was on my side. She came around the desk and put her arms around me, the way Eleanor used to when I came home from a bad day at the shop in the early years, when the money was tight and the machines kept breaking and I wasn't sure any of it was going to work. That same way. What about the kids? She asked. Garrett's kids. Your grandchildren. There it was. The question I had been carrying around all day, like a stone in my chest. Garrett has 2 children, Maya, who is 12, and Caleb, who is 9. They call me Grandpa Jerry. Maya helps me with the crossword puzzle when they visit on Sundays, and Caleb refuses to eat anything green but will eat 3 helpings of my chili. They had nothing to do with any of this. They didn't choose their father any more than I chose mine. Those kids stay in my life, I said. Whatever happens with Garrett, those kids are not collateral damage. Melissa was quiet for a moment. Have you thought about what you're going to say to him? Not today, eventually. I had thought about it. Had been thinking about it since I sat in Diane Kowalski's office and felt the world rearrange itself around me. 41 years with Walter. I had known him since a Tuesday night in 1983 when we were both 22 and broke and playing pool at a bar in Dayton. I had known my son since the moment he was born. Since before that, since Eleanor and I sat in our apartment in the middle of the night after the positive test, and she cried happy tears on my shoulder and said she couldn't believe how lucky we were. 41 years? 37 years. And it ended in a conference room over a folder. I don't know what I'm going to say, I told Melissa. I'm not there yet. She nodded. Take the time. 2 weeks later, I called Garrett and asked him to come to the house. Not the office. The house. Because some conversations belong in the places where real life happens, not behind desks. He sat in the living room across from me, in the chair where Walter used to sit during football games, which struck me as a particular kind of irony that I didn't remark on. He looked like he hadn't slept in 2 weeks. He probably hadn't. His attorney had called mine 4 times. There were things to be negotiated, consequences to be organized, agreements to be reached about his position at the company, which was no longer his position. We'd get to all of that. First, I wanted to talk to my son. Your mother built this family, I said. You know that. She is the reason we have what we have. The house, the memories, the business that paid for every good thing in your life. She worked harder than I did in some ways, the invisible work that never shows up in a financial statement. She believed in you completely, right up until the day she died. Garrett was looking at his hands, same thing his grandfather used to do when he was ashamed. I need to know if you were thinking about her when you were doing this, because I need to know that, as your father. Were you thinking about your mother at all? A long silence. Every day, he said. His voice cracked on the last word. I believe that too. I don't think believing it makes it better, but I believed it. Walter came to me, Garrett said. About 4 months after the funeral, he told me you were struggling, that you weren't fit to keep running the company, that if I didn't help him facilitate a transition, you'd run the whole thing into the ground and there'd be nothing left for anybody. He said he was protecting the business, protecting your legacy, and the $460,000. Garrett flinched. He said it was consulting compensation, that it was above board, that, Garrett, he stopped. Don't, I said again. Quieter this time, not angry, just tired. Don't give me Walter's version of what it was. I read the messages. I know what you said in your own words. Own it or don't, but don't hand me someone else's explanation for something you chose to do. He was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry, he said finally. I know that doesn't mean anything right now, but I am. I looked at my son who was wearing, I noticed, a different jacket today. Not the Navy one. He'd worn the Navy one to the meeting where he thought he was going to finish what he and Walter had started. He wasn't wearing it now. I'm going to tell you something, I said, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond. He nodded. I'm angry at you. I'm angry in a way that I don't have language for, and I've been alive for 63 years and been through things that I thought were the worst things that could happen. Losing your grandfather. Losing your mother. None of those compare to what it felt like sitting in that conference room and realizing my own son was on the other side of the table. That's a specific kind of pain, and it doesn't have a name. His eyes were wet now. But you are my son. I am your father. That doesn't stop because you made the worst mistake of your life. It doesn't stop because I'm furious, and I may be furious for a long time. It doesn't stop because your mother is gone and she can't sit between us the way she always did when we argued and make us both feel ashamed of ourselves for being stubborn. I paused. It just doesn't stop. He broke then. Just completely broke, sitting in that chair, face in his hands, the kind of crying that has no dignity to it, the kind that comes when everything you've been holding together finally lets go. I sat across from him and let it happen. I didn't go to him. I wasn't ready for that. But I didn't leave either. When he was quieter, I said, "Maya and Caleb still come for Sunday crosswords." "That doesn't change." He looked up. "You and I have a long road," I said. "I don't know what it looks like on the other end. But those kids didn't do anything. And they're not losing their grandfather because their father made choices he can't take back. That's not negotiable." He nodded. He didn't say anything else. I think there wasn't anything else to say that day. Walter sent a letter through his attorney 3 days after the conference room. Formal, careful, legalistic. The kind of letter that has clearly been written with liability in mind. He expressed regret. He offered to cooperate with the investigation. He used the phrase, "deeply sorry" 4 times, and my name 0 times. I read it once, set it on my desk, and didn't respond. My attorney responded, "Some conversations are over." The investigation ran for 5 months. At the end of it, Meridian Capital Group withdrew from any further discussions, citing legal complications, which was a polite way of saying they hadn't known the full picture of what Walter was doing and didn't want the exposure. Walter resigned from the company, relinquished his equity stake as part of a settlement agreement, and agreed to a 2-year non-compete. No criminal charges in the end, though there was a period where the word fraud was being used by people in suits in rooms I was sitting in, and I won't pretend that didn't feel like something. Garrett resigned from his position, returned the $460,000 with interest as part of a separate civil settlement, and we are, as I said, on a long road. I promoted 2 people from inside the company to fill the operational gaps. A woman named Rita Chen, who had been with us for 19 years and knew the operations floor better than anyone alive, became the new head of operations. A man named Deshaun Buckley, who had been my logistics manager for 12 years, became COO. Both of them cried when I told them. Rita actually said she'd been waiting to hear those words for a decade, which made me laugh for the first time in what felt like months. The company is still mine, still standing in Columbus, Ohio, still employing the people whose families depend on it, still making the components that go into machines that go into places that do work that matters. I don't take that for granted anymore, if I ever did. This past winter, on a Sunday in February, Maya and Caleb came over. We did the crossword, the 3 of us, and then Caleb ate 2 bowls of chili and told me it was the best thing he'd ever eaten, which he says every single time, and every single time it means something. Maya, who is 12 and sharper than any 12-year-old I've ever known, looked at me at one point while Caleb was distracted and said, "Grandpa Jerry, are you okay? You seem sad sometimes." I thought about how to answer that for a moment. "I had a hard year," I said. "But I'm okay." She seemed to accept that. "Dad's sad too," she said quietly. "He doesn't say so, but he is." I nodded. "Your dad and I have some things we're working through. But I want you to know something, and I want you to remember it. You and Caleb are not part of whatever is happening between the grown-ups. That's ours to sort out. What you have is your grandfather, who loves you, and that is not going anywhere, no matter what." She considered this with the seriousness of someone twice her age. "Okay," she said, and then she went back to the crossword and announced that 14 across was definitely astrolabe and I was wrong about it being telescope, and she was right, as it turned out. That evening, after they'd gone home, I sat in the living room in the quiet that has been the particular texture of this house since Eleanor left it, and I thought about the year I had just come through. I thought about Walter Hines, who I had known since I was 22 years old, who I had trusted with my life, who had sat in my wife's kitchen while she was sick and begun the process of dismantling what we had built together. I thought about my son, who was grieving his mother and who let that grief be pointed in the wrong direction by a man who knew exactly which angle to aim it from. I thought about Diane Kowalski and her flat, patient eyes and the manila envelope that changed everything. I thought about Eleanor, who never knew any of this, who went to her grave believing in the people around her, and I decided that wasn't a tragedy. She was spared it. That's not the worst thing. There's something nobody tells you about betrayal when it comes from people you have loved for a very long time. They tell you it will hurt, and it does, in ways that are hard to put words to. But what they don't tell you is the strange, uncomfortable weight of what comes after, the period when the hurt is still there, but the emergency is over, and you have to figure out what you're actually going to do with what's left. Whether the anger gets to run the rest of your life, or whether you eventually pry it off and set it down somewhere. Whether the people who are still standing deserve the version of you that existed before all of this. The one who trusted easily and assumed the best, and never once thought to have his best friend investigated. I'm 63 years old. I don't have infinite years left to spend being smaller than I was before someone tried to make me smaller. I spent 40 years building something real, and I'm going to spend whatever time I have left standing in it. Not diminished, not afraid, not defined by what Walter Hines decided to do in the 11 months after my wife died. The company is mine. The grandkids come on Sundays. My daughter calls every other day. My son and I are on a long road, and I can't see the end of it, but I'm walking it anyway because that's what you do when you're a father, even when fatherhood has given you reasons to quit. Rita Chen sent me an email last Tuesday, just a short one, saying the new aerospace contract had come through and it was the largest single contract in Callaway Precision's history. I printed it out and taped it to the wall above my desk, next to a photograph of Eleanor from 1986, standing in the doorway of the original garage, laughing at something I'd said, looking like she had no idea she was standing at the beginning of something. She didn't. Neither did I. That's how most things begin. Not with a plan, but with two people in a garage, laughing, deciding to try. If you've watched this far, I want you to hear something directly from me. When someone you love for a long time betrays you, the world will have a lot of opinions about what you should do next. Some people will tell you to burn it all down. Some will tell you to forgive immediately and loudly. Some will tell you to never trust anyone again. I'm not going to tell you any of that. What I'll tell you is this. You get to decide, slowly, over time, what you rebuild and what you leave in the rubble. You don't have to know on day one. You don't have to have it sorted by the end of the month or the end of the year. What you have to do is stay standing long enough to find out who's still there when the dust settles. In my case, it was my daughter, 2 employees who believed in the same thing I believed in, 2 grandkids who care about chili and crossword puzzles, and a memory of my wife that nobody could touch or trade or negotiate away. Turned out to be more than enough. Like this video if something here hit home. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, stories about people who refuse to be defined by the worst thing that happened to them. And if you're in the middle of something right now, something that feels like it's going to take you apart completely, just stay in it a little longer. The other side exists. I promise you it does. I'll see you in the next one.